It grieves me to see degraded waterways. It grieves me to see noxious weeds and feral animals contaminating our national parks, our remnant urban bush. I think we really need a much bigger national effort on land care, for instance. And one of the real problems, I think, with proper environmental concern in recent times is that we've forgotten about all of those practical environmental measures to focus on emissions reduction. And I guess what we've seen from Steve Nowotowski and even to some extent Bob Brown is a sudden realisation that the emissions obsession is actually devastating the natural environment that we cherish.
2025 is a year of change. Cultural and political disruption is transforming our nation and the global order. The rebellion against the establishment has accelerated. Australia and the Western Alliance is now at a crossroads. Either the mainstream will continue its ascendancy or the elites will prevail. Hello, Tony, and g'day to all of our viewers and listeners. Great to be back. Today, Tony will be sharing his insights on the Albanese and Trump meeting, the machinations of the Liberal Party and net zero, plus the latest foray in terms of the direction of the Liberal Party and how it can get back into government. Tony, great to be back with you.
Dan, as always, thanks for your company.
All right, well, let's start with Anthony Albanese's meeting with Donald Trump, where he secured a multi-billion-dollar deal in relation to critical minerals. The meeting seemed to go pretty well from the perspective of the Prime Minister. Kevin Rudd may have been licking his wounds a little bit, but nonetheless, I guess if you're Anthony Albanese, you'd have to say you're pretty happy with how things went.
I agree, Dan. It was a remarkably, certainly a surprisingly successful meeting, given all the differences in temperament and outlook and political orientation of the two leaders. I mean, Donald Trump is about as iconoclastic as anyone can be in this age, whereas Anthony Albanese is very much a standard Green left contemporary leader. They did seem to have reasonable personal chemistry, which is good. President Trump did express strong support for AUKUS, which is great. Somehow, we managed to get away with our embarrassingly low defence spending. And yes, there's the strategic minerals deal, which on the face of it is good, and if it comes to fruition, would certainly be good. My anxiety, Dan, is that it's one thing to put aside money for government subsidies. It's one thing to announce that this is all going to happen. But we have such a terrible record in recent times of actually taking projects from idea to reality. Yes, we must end our dependence on communist China for all of these critical minerals. But the idea that within a couple of years we are suddenly going to take a whole lot of rather environmentally difficult mines from idea to execution is pretty implausible. Now, at the moment, some 90% of these rare earths and critical minerals are apparently controlled by China. There's only two, I believe, rare earths producers outside China, one in the United States and Lynas, which is mined in Australia and mostly processed in Malaysia. We have to absolutely break China's stranglehold because these things are critical for everything from smartphones to jet fighters. But our record is appalling, frankly, and I suspect it's going to get worse, not better, under the legislation that the government is trying to pass this week to establish a new regulator and quite possibly to put in even further hurdles that new projects have got to leap over. So while it was certainly a good day for the Prime Minister and a good day for Australia on the face of it, one swallow doesn't make a summer, as they say.
There were some who were calling for Kevin Rudd to be rescinded from his role as ambassador, given he was singled out by Trump. Now, when you watch the full video, it didn't appear to me that Trump even really knew who he was, which was sort of even more surprising. I don't know. I was always big on Kevin Rudd not staying there, but it kind of does look like he's managed to get through it in his own kind of way. So I suspect he's probably safe, at least for the rest of this term of government. What do you think?
Well, Dan, I never thought that Kevin was a poor appointment. I actually think that it makes sense to appoint a former senior politician to Washington, to London, a couple of key positions where English is widely spoken. I think Delhi, for instance, former senior politicians go well. And look, Rudd has the pester factor, and frankly, if you want to get action out of the Congress, you've got to go, and out of the administration, you've got to go and pester people. And Kevin's always been pretty good at making himself a pain for a cause he believes in. So I think Kevin was actually a pretty shrewd appointment. And while the Donald did express rather dismissive sentiments about him, I thought it was really more political theatre than anything to worry about. So I just think that Kevin will serve out his term, and I think you've got to give him credit for getting the strategic minerals deal over the line. I mean, let's face it, Albo was on holidays the week before the meeting. Kevin, I'm sure, was pounding the corridors of the Capitol, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for this deal.
All right, well, let's go to the domestic front, and we've had a lot of action over the last couple of weeks, most prominently Barnaby Joyce saying that he's going to not recontest his seat of New England. Now, there's questions about whether he would then leave the Nationals and join One Nation to run as the lead Senate candidate for New South Wales, in which case he'd almost certainly be elected on that ticket on current polling. But I think it's yet another example of how not just the Liberals are struggling with the questions of net zero and other issues like that, but the Nationals are also seem to be struggling with that. Do you think this is sort of the canary in the coal mine for the Nationals, or is this a bit of sort of the Barnaby show type thing?
Well, Dan, I have a lot of time for Barnaby. He's, I think, a great retail politician. I think he's a good bloke. I like him a lot. I think he's got a lot to continue to add to our public life. I desperately hope he keeps doing it as a member of the National Party, and I hope he stays in the Parliament as a member of the National Party. As I understand it, while he has indicated an intention not to recontest his seat, that is a bit provisional on what the National Party decides to do with net zero. Now, Barnaby is very much against net zero. He's always been against net zero. During the life of the Morrison government, I think he accepted net zero as something that needed to be done for other reasons at that time without ever being happy about it. Let's not forget that net zero was not a legislated commitment under the Morrison government. It was just an aspirational target. Scott Morrison has denied this, but I still think that the real reason for us adopting net zero was because it was the price of getting AUKUS out of Joe Biden and Boris Johnson. I think it was a mistake, frankly, because it took away a very potent political difference between us and the Labor Party. Obviously, the Labor Party has toughened up its support for net zero since the 2022 election, legislating the net zero commitment, legislating a 2030 target, legislating for an 82% renewables by 2030. And now, of course, they've got the even more draconian 2035 target. So I think Barnaby is right on net zero. I don't see how the National Party or the Liberal Party can keep net zero other than a very vague, nice to do aspiration at some point in time. Because even if they say it's not legislated, but we are going to try to achieve it, they'll be expected to have a pathway forward. And once you start to have a net zero pathway, you get back into this morass that we're currently in, where our energy system is falling to pieces, our transport system is threatened, our agriculture is threatened, even military procurement is going to start being warped by all this stuff. We're going to want electric-powered tanks. We're going to want jets running on biofuels and things like this. I mean, these are the ramifications of any net zero or emissions reduction target, which is front and centre of policy. So my own view is that cutting emissions is something that is nice to do. It should never take priority over economic growth. It should never take priority over national security. And unless the coalition says, look, we're going to repeal the legislation, and we're not going to have a target. Certainly, we're not going to have any target without, at least for the next few years, focusing absolutely on affordable and reliable electricity, and on strengthening our economy, boosting our wealth, and maybe in 10 years' time we might have another look at this issue and decide. But this gets us to a more fundamental point, Dan. Why do we assume that the only impact on climate is mankind's carbon dioxide? Obviously, climate does change, but given that there have been dramatic changes in climate over the millennia, the Ice Ages being the obvious example, but the Roman and medieval warm periods being further examples, given that there have been very significant changes in climate without any human intervention whatsoever, why do we have this automatic assumption, this ferocious conviction that the only thing that really matters is mankind's carbon dioxide? I mean, obviously there are a lot of other things that impact on climate other than mankind's carbon dioxide. So why do we assume that the only or even the main factor is our emissions?
Hi, thanks for watching. Did you know that 3/4 of you who are watching this podcast aren't currently subscribed to the IPA's YouTube channel? So do us a favour, hit subscribe so you don't miss any of the action. And while you're at it, head to ipa.org.au and follow the prompts to subscribe to the IPA's website, so that way you will find all of our research and analysis. Now, back to the chat.
Well, this is what happens when you concede the debate. It goes bit by bit by bit, and all of a sudden we're here with a crazy net zero target. I think the other thing with net zero is it's a vehicle for Labor to implement their quasi-socialist agenda, because it's, as you were sort of alluding to, it's not just the energy system, which only accounts for about a third of total emissions from human activity, but it's the cars we can drive, the food we can eat, the houses we can live in, how frequently we can engage in air transportation and so forth. So my main argument as to why the Liberal Party should drop net zero, aside from all of the economic and social problems, is it's illiberal. It is fundamentally an illiberal policy. It's anti-liberal, and I just don't even understand how a Liberal Party could adopt a policy that is so openly socialist.
And isn't it interesting, Dan, how over the last couple of decades, the Marxists who failed to persuade the working class to embrace equality have been much better at persuading the middle class to embrace the politics of climate and identity. All economy-wrecking policies, all society-wrecking policies, but the middle class have been much more susceptible to the Marxist siren song, not on the basis of economics so much, but on the basis of climate and identity. I mean, we have to destroy the economy in order to save the planet. We have to destroy society in order to end discrimination against minorities. And we've just got to push back incredibly hard about this now that we know that being polite in the face of this is causing so much obvious difficulty.
Well, there's a couple of people who are speaking out about this. Two members of Parliament for the Liberal Party who have been engaging in this debate recently are Henry Pike, who's the member for Bowman, and Garth Hamilton, who's the member for Groom, and they've written articles in The Australian over the last couple of days. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on, I guess, the direction they're coming from. So Henry Pike has basically argued that the Liberal Party needs to be a party of blue-collar workers and the blue-collar working class, such as Tony's tradies, who backed you in 2013. And look, I think Henry makes a very important point, which is you just look at the electoral mathematics of this. So even if the coalition wins back all the Teal seats, every single one of them, which nobody believes is ever going to happen, but even if they did, the coalition still needs 25 more seats to get into government. Now, they're Labor seats. So the coalition simply has to win outer suburban Labor voters if they're ever going to get anywhere near government ever again. So isn't it just, like from my vantage point, there's all of the economic, social and moral arguments for the policies we're talking about, but there's the electoral maths, which is if you don't win blue-collar Labor voters, you're never getting into government again.
Well, again, I think that's a very good point, Dan. I don't think that we should surrender any seats, including Teal seats, but yes, to get back into government, we need to win 30 plus seats, and plainly there's 7 or 8 Teal seats, so we've got to go well beyond that. I agree with both Garth and Henry that we need to appeal to the aspirational working class, whether it was the Reagan Democrats, whether it was Thatcher's blue-collar Tories or Howard's battlers or, dare I say it, Tony's tradies. Centre-right political parties, conservative political parties, only succeed if they manage to attract a large segment of the aspirational working class. I used to often say back in the day that the Howard government is the best friend the working people of Australia have ever had, because certainly in the Howard era, real wages increased dramatically, unemployment fell substantially, productivity went up dramatically in the Howard era and has since largely stagnated. And if we're going to win back Teal seats, it's not going to be by out-tealing the Teals. It's going to be because the voters in those seats decide that whether they like our climate policies or not, there are other things on which to support the Liberal Party. I mean, I kept saying prior to the last election that you are not going to defeat a bad Labor government by voting Teal. The only way you will defeat a bad Labor government is by voting for the coalition. Now, as it happened, the coalition nationally didn't make a strong enough pitch for that line of argument to work. There was too much Me Tooing on so many things. But if we're going to win an election, including Teal seats, we've got to create a strong contest, and that certainly doesn't mean aping the Teals on environmental issues. I would often get letters, Dan, as a Member of Parliament, from cranky constituents who would say that I disagree with you on policy X or position Y, and I'm never going to vote for you again. To which I would always respond, I said, understand that we don't agree on issue X, but issue X is not the only one. There are other issues, and I look forward to putting forward positions on some of the other issues that are important to you that you might find more palatable and perhaps even manage to vote for me, because, again, something I would often say to constituents, politics is a contest not between the perfect and the imperfect, but between different shades of imperfection. How many candidates are people who you can absolutely agree with on every single subject?
Well, I think the other thing is people knew you weren't trying to be something that you weren't. And so when you look at the Australian National University's analysis of the election they put out every 3 years, they track various different policies, including on the environment and who do you trust. You actually fared better than your successor on that. And the reason for that is because people knew who you were and what you stood for, and that you weren't trying to fob them off with a policy that was just trying to placate them. Whereas the issue that a lot of politicians have is they go, oh, we'll give this group a bit of something, that group a bit of something, that, and then no one ends up believing, like none of them believe you at all.
Exactly
so
right.
You're better off just telling people, this is what I believe, this is what we're going to do, and these are the reasons why, rather than trying to fob them off with something you don't believe in.
Very good point, Dan. And look, I reckon I regard myself as a conservationist. For instance, one of the things I proposed in opposition and did in government, building on a program that I was associated with in the Howard era, was the Green Army, because it grieves me to see degraded waterways. It grieves me to see noxious weeds and feral animals contaminating our national parks, our remnant urban bush. I think we really need a much bigger national effort on land care, for instance, and water care. And one of the real problems, I think, with proper environmental concern in recent times is that we've forgotten about all of those practical environmental measures to focus on emissions reduction. And I guess what we've seen from people who really do take the environment very seriously, like Steve Nowotowski, and even to some extent Bob Brown, who's campaigning ferociously against a big new wind farm in the Bass Strait, is a sudden realisation that the emissions obsession is actually devastating the natural environment that we cherish. I mean, there's a wonderful Johannes Leek cartoon of Albo and Chris Bowen cresting a hill to see this vista as far as the eye can see of wind turbines and solar panels, and they say to the startled green bushwalkers, they say, "We're saving the planet." I mean, this is the madness of all of this.
Yeah.
We are just literally destroying the landscape in order to save the planet. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I want to turn to what Garth Hamilton has also argued, which I think is fairly provocative. And I think both Garth and Henry and a number of others, to me, very much represent the future leadership of the party. They're the new guard, and they're coming up with new ideas and new arguments that I think are applicable to the challenges we face. And what Garth argues is that for the first time in modern politics, unions are not the natural enemy of the centre-right of politics, and he cites examples of net zero and mass migration, both of which are against the interests of your typical working person. Net zero is destroying jobs, putting up energy prices. Mass migration is reducing wages and taking jobs from locals. And he argues that the destructive impact of net zero and mass migration on our economy far outweigh the negatives of union overreach. Interested in your on your perspective on Garth's take there.
Well, Dan, look, a union that is genuinely interested in maximising employment prospects, that is genuinely interested in maximising our economic growth, is a union that I'd certainly be prepared to I guess, talk to and encourage. The difficulty with unionism is that rather than focusing on the highest common factor, it tends to focus on the lowest common denominator. Now, in the old days, when your average worker was at a serious disadvantage compared to the average boss, I mean, maybe there was a huge gulf in their education, maybe there was a huge gulf in their just general savvy. Unions, I think, made a lot of sense. In the days when there were lots of deaths in industrial accidents and when bosses were inclined to treat their workers just as factors of production rather than the greatest asset that a business has got, again, unions made sense. But these days, any successful business, at least in a country like Australia, is a partnership. It's not this kind of union of impersonal economic forces, labour on the one hand, capital on the other hand, and never the twain shall meet. So I'm certainly happy to be encouraging to decent union officials who, for arguments, will say that we do have to get more gas out of the ground, we do have to drop the anti-nuclear ban, we do have to ensure that the business is making a profit so that the workers can have a job. But when they start demanding a whole lot of changes that are going to make it harder to employ people, that are going to make it harder for businesses to succeed, that's where I guess I part company with them. And so, yeah, we've got to be pragmatic about this. But in there, at root, most union officials see the boss as the enemy. and I think that's a problem. The great thing about the Hawke-Keating government at its best was their insight, and it's so unusual on the Labor side of politics, their insight that the workers would do best if the boss did well too. And one of the many reasons why we had 25 years of great prosperity and considerable productivity improvements was because under Hawke and Keating and then under Howard and Costello, we got right away from this them and us mindset in the workplace.
I think the other interesting thing about unions is that it's not, the typical union member is not a 40-year-old manufacturing worker. It's an aging public servant that's waiting for their defined benefits to get paid out, and they support these kind of woke ideologies.
We've got to have an efficient economy. People have got to be prepared to be flexible. People have got to be prepared to adapt. And I can remember when I was managing a concrete batching plant back in the late 1980s, Dan, and the union tried to say that this staff member couldn't touch anything that was the responsibility of that staff member, and as management, I wasn't able to do anything that was the prerogative of the workforce, and it didn't go well. As it happened, in the end, I developed, thanks to, I think, the quality of the blue-collar team at this plant, who were terrific people once you got to know them well, we in the end decided that we were all just going to muck in together. So when we had to do things like dig out slurry pits, we all just put the overalls on and did it together. We didn't bring in contractors because it wasn't any of our jobs to do all this stuff. So a business is much more like a team where everyone is working towards the same goal than it is like a war zone where if one person gets a bit, the other guy loses a bit.
Yeah. Just to round out, I think one of the interesting things that's happened to the Labor Party is with superannuation, it increasingly has become the party of capital rather than the party of labour, which is one of the transformations that Keating undertook, which is why he is so valorised, because you had the massive decline to the share of workers who are in a union, where it's now about 10% or something like that of the workforce, but they still have a lot of influence, a lot of control over the direction and the financial flows of our economy because of superannuation. So from a political standpoint, it was a very genius move.
Look, you're right. What we've seen to a considerable extent is the socialisation of capitalism. We now have all these businesses basically running a political agenda rather than a business agenda because they're worried about the union super fund shareholding. So look, you're absolutely right, Dan. And this is, one of the things that I did as PM was I tried to stop the increase in the quantum of people's wages that was going off into compulsory super, because my basic instinct is that it's not the union's money, it's not the government's money, it's your money, and why should you be forced to put a certain compulsory percentage of it into superannuation if that's not your priority at this time? Why should 25-year-olds and 35-year-olds whose priority is buying a house and starting a family, why should their priority be saving up for retirement, which may not happen for 40 or 50 years?
Yeah, exactly. All right, Tony, we'll leave it there for today. Thanks for the chat, and we'll catch up in a fortnight.
I look forward to it.
This is a production of the Centre for the Australian Way of Life at the Institute of Public Affairs. To find out more, visit australia.ipa.org.au.